Welcome to Standing for Truth. My name is Donny Budinsky, and tonight we're tackling a topic that has made a surprising comeback in recent years, the flat earth phenomenon. To help us sort fact from fiction, both biblically and scientifically, we are joined by Dr. Heinz Lycklama, a nuclear physicist with decades of experience in research, analysis, and Christian apologetics. Dr. Heinz is here to give a clear, evidence based response that exposes the flaws of flat earth thinking and shows why both scripture and science point unmistakably to a round earth. Tonight, we'll explore the history of flat earth thinking, the claims of modern flat earth believers, what the Bible actually teaches, what scientific observation reveals, and the deception behind the movement's recent resurgence. This is going to be a fascinating and eye-opening presentation. So let's dive right in. Dr. Heinz, it's great to have you back. I feel like you were just here for the previous very comprehensive talk that you gave. And so it is a privilege to have you back with us here. Welcome to the program, brother.
Well, thank you for the invitation. I look forward to talking on this topic. And you might ask the question, well, why would somebody that does apologetics speak on a topic having to do with the shape of the earth? And the reason I do this is because I have, with my science background, obviously I can use my experience to examine the claims that are made by the flat earth people and looking at, evidence on both sides of this. We draw some conclusions, and I'll lead you through that in a minute. One of the reasons why I do this is because it's a topic that has come up. We've had people at our church, visiting the church, and actually members of a church as well, saying, really, the Bible says the earth is flat. So, why don't you believe that? Well, so as a scientist, I tackle this topic in an open fashion. That's why I call this talk the flat earth phenomenon. And I look at the evidence for the shape of the earth being a globe. And I also look at the evidence that flat earth people claim show that the earth really is flat. And they also claim, well, the Bible teaches that the earth is flat. So we're going to look at the claims on both sides and then draw conclusions. You'll notice on the right, I have three well-known scientists who have also tackled this question of the flat earth. Dr. Rob Carter from CMI, Dr. Jason Lyle, who is well known in the apologetics industry, and then Dr. Danny Faulkner, who has actually even written a book on the flat earth issues. And then on the other side, I highlight some people on the left who claim that the earth is flat, and they presumably provide evidence saying, yes, really it is flat, And these are people you may have heard of. Flat Earth Dave, he has got a very active channel discussing this issue. Mark Sargent actually is a person that is very near to where I live here in Washington State. And Eric Dubé, who is one of the leaders in this flat earth movement. So we're going to get into that as we look at that. But first of all, let me just make a list of the topics we're going to look into. So you'll see here, we have to address the question, what is the flat earth concept? And I'll explain that as we look at the spherical earth versus what the flat earth people believe the earth looks like. And this is kind of a map of what they think the flat earth looks like, and then compared with the spherical earth. So we definitely have to talk about what is the flat earth concept. And then we look at the history, spherical earth history. There are actually scientists in the early days who, claim they have some evidence that the Earth really is spherical. And when I started to dig into this topic, I noticed that there are actually a lot of past scientists who claim to have evidence for that. And then we'll look also at a brief history of flat Earth history, people that believe that the Earth is flat and why. And then answer some of the questions. Well, what do flat Earthers really claim? What do they say? And then, of course, we have to answer the question, well, what does the Bible teach about the shape of the Earth? And we're going to look at that too, because that's very important, because some people that believe in flat Earth use the Bible to support their claims. So what does that tell us? And then we're going to go look at 12 evidences that we as scientists use as evidence for the spherical shape of the Earth. And then on the other side, I look at 12 challenges to people that believe in the flat Earth concept. I present 12 scientific challenges to them and say, how do you answer this? If the Earth really is flat, how do you explain what we observe here? And then what assumptions are they making? They actually have a number of assumptions that they claim supports the flat Earth concepts. But of course, if assumptions are incorrect, then of course the conclusion that the Earth is flat is also incorrect. You may have heard of the final experiment. This is an experiment we'll talk about at the very end of this talk. And then we'll draw some conclusions having examined all this material. So I'm going to show a few pictures of what the flat Earth people think the flat Earth is like. And they actually take some verses from the Bible and says, there are some translations of the Bible that actually use the word flat. And is there any weight to that? So they claim, the Earth is flat, the Earth doesn't move. Here are some of the verses that they claim support their belief. They say the Earth rests on pillars, and that's why you see pillars here in this drawing. The sun goes around the Earth, and then the stars are lights set in a dome over the Earth. And what do they mean by that? Okay, so this is one model. All flat earthers don't have the same model, but we'll get to the most popular one here. And in the Bible, it uses the word firmament in some older translations of the Bible. What do they mean by that? Firmament, dome. Well, they think it means that there is a dome-like flat Earth here with this kind of a map of that, and then there's a dome over that. Another way of looking at it is here. This is a little clearer, the firmament. So we have here a, obviously a circle of the world, of the Earth. And so we see the continents in the middle of there, and we see the sun and the moon. They orbit on top of this, within the dome, underneath the dome, and also the stars that we see. They would say, well, yes, they're part of the firmament, and they would say that the firmament is about 3,000 miles above the flat Earth. So this is an illustration. If you look at some of the Genesis answers in Genesis web pages, you'll see this is a picture that they use to describe that. So what do we have that's so unique about this flat Earth concept? Well, you'll notice they consider that the sun is actually, it's not some huge globe that is shining down on the Earth. It's actually a spotlight where it limits, the part of the Earth that it covers. And then the sun rotates above the Earth like this, and every 24 hours, it goes around the center, which they consider as the North Pole. Okay, so you'll see there's only part of the Earth is covered by the sun during the day. And here's another way to look at it. And you'll see here the sun and the moon, they're both above the supposed flat Earth. And of course, the sun and the moon orbit different periods, of course. I mean, the sun is once per day, and the moon is about one every 20 days or so. So here we see, this is how they picture the flat Earth with the sun and moon. And notice that the sun and moon each looked to be the same size. And of course, when we look up in the sky, we see the sun and we see the moon, and they are, in fact, about equal. Then in the 1892, there's a flat Earth person named Gleason, and he came up with a standard map of what the world looks like. If you're trying to map the world, okay, you've got the North Pole in the center here. You've got a what they call an ice wall. In other words, there's no such thing as the Antarctic. There is the Arctic, but the Antarctic is actually an ice wall around that. And you can make maps of the Americas, North America, South America, and Europe and Asia, and also Australia at the bottom. And you'll see that they're not to size; they are not to size, and I'll explain why that is, because it's a projection map that we have here. And it's not strange to have a projection map, but how do you interpret that? It becomes the question. So the flat Earth concept, to summarize, the Earth is a round disk, like this. It is stationary, and it is 25,000 miles in diameter across here. And you'll know in the spherical Earth model, their circumference is 25 miles plus or minus. But of course, they have to stretch that out to make it flat Earth. And then you have the North Pole in the middle, and you have the Antarctic, which forms an ice wall. So it's a map of the Earth with the North Pole at the center, no South Pole. A Gleason standard map is assumed. And the dome shown here is about 3,000 miles above the Earth. The sun and moon are each about 32 miles in diameter. And you can see here, they're a very small part of that whole 25,000 mile in circumference. So the sun and moon orbit around the northern axis above the Earth under the dome. The stars and the 5 visible planets, without the telescope, you can see these planets, Jupiter, Venus, Mars, Mercury, and Saturn, from the Earth. And they can be seen in this dome here, the structure. So then you have the Antarctic wall around the Earth's disk circumference at the base of the dome, and you can see that pictured here. Okay, so, and now let's go back. We're going to look at 2 different histories. First of all, a spherical Earth history. And when I started to look at this, I was very surprised at how many scientists, astronomers, mathematicians in the past have actually done some examination of the stars and the planets that you can see, and the sun and the moon, of course, which you can see. And of course, in those days, they were using the geocentric model with the Earth in the middle and the moon orbiting around the Earth, and the Mercury and Venus, and then the sun, Mars, and Jupiter, which could be seen. So this is roughly what they had in mind, because from the Earth, you could see these other planets there. Pythagoras, he's the inventor of the Pythagoras theorem. He lived back in the 5000 BC. And he came up with a model with 8 concentric spheres surrounding the Earth that you see here. And he actually made the first mention of the fact that the Earth might be a sphere and not flat. So, and he remarked that when you look at ships going over the horizon or going out over the horizon, you could see that their hulls disappeared over a distance. And then another one, Ponticus, a few hundred years later, he proposed that the Earth rotates on its axis. And then Aristarchus of Samos, about the same time, maybe a little later than this fellow here, a Greek astronomer, mathematician. He is the one that made mention of a possibly a heliocentric model with the sun in the middle rather than the Earth. And that was way back, 250 BC or so. So he even came up with that mention of possibly a heliocentric model. But of course, scientists didn't agree on the heliocentric model until much, much, much later. And he saw that the other planets were arranged in the order of distance around the sun. Okay, so that's early astronomers. Now, how do they do a distance measurement? Well, they used what they call a parallax method. And you can see here, assuming the Earth is a sphere, and you could estimate the distance to the moon by this parallax method. So if you're two different places on the moon, on the Earth, you're going to see it at a different angles. And by doing using trig math and measuring these angles here, you could come to an estimate of the distance of the moon away from the Earth. And the same thing if you assume that the Earth is really, orbiting the sun like this, you could look at a star in the distance, and you're looking at that star from two different positions. You could measure this angle, this phi over 2. And again, using trigonometry, you can make an estimate of how far that star is away. So this is, today, of course, that is common use. Here, Aristarchus in about 300 BC, he observed from the Earth at 2 different times, 6 months apart, which is what you see here. So the distance to the star using trig, he could estimate that. Okay, and then we come to another astronomer, mathematician, Eratosthenes of Cyrene, and he lived, he made these observations about 200 BC, I think. So he was the first person to actually calculate the circumference of the Earth. He assumed that the Earth was a sphere, and he could use the trig and position to estimate the distance, or actually using angles and distance, he could estimate the circumference of the Earth, assuming it was a sphere. And then Hipparchus, back in around 150 BC or so, a Greek astronomer and mathematician, is actually the founder of the math of trig. He discovered the precision of the equinoxes and developed a method to predict solar eclipses even. This is back in 150 BC. Remarkable science that was in use at that time. So how did our Eratosthenes, the Greek philosopher, astronomer, around 200 BC, how did he estimate the circumference? Well, there's a well in Cyrene, in the southern part of Egypt here, Syene here, the place of the Aswan Dam. There's a well there that is perfectly you could see the sun shining to the bottom of that well because the sun came over there perfectly. And so you had a point that you knew where you were at. And then if you go here to Alexandria and where you have the sun rays coming in, they, of course, it's further away. They know this distance, and they have the the point there is at an angle. It was measured to be about 7%, so or 7 degrees. So that is about 1/50th of the total distance around the Earth if it's spherical. So he used that to estimate, and he came up very close to 40,000 kilometers, which is about very close to, I think it's 24,000 and something. Not exactly what we know the circumference to be today, but very, very close to that. And so this is what the scientists in those days used. And of course, they assumed that the Earth was a sphere in shape. And of course, we back in those days of the time of Christ and a few hundred years before and after, Ptolemy, came up with the geocentric model of the solar system, and that again is this picture with the Earth at the middle. So it's called geocentric. And then you have the moon and sun. Sun is further away than the moon. And you have these planets that you can see from the Earth's surface. So that was the assumed model, okay? And, lots were written about this during that time. And then they identified the what we call the classical planets. This is before the time of the invention of the telescope, because you could see these planets out with your naked eye. You didn't need a telescope to see them. And so they could do some science with that. If they observe the movement of these planets, they could make some estimates of distance and orbit time and all that. So very, very advanced science and math being used at that time. So then we jump all the way to the time of Nicholas Copernicus in 1473 to 1543 AD. And he was the person that really proposed the heliocentric model, in other words, with the sun at the center, and then the planets orbiting around the sun at different periods. And of course, the Earth is we know that to be the third planet out from the sun in distance. Okay, so they assumed, and these are mainly Greek thinking. They assumed that the orbits were circular, okay, complete circles, and that was good enough for this model. Although they had to make some adjustments because they actually are not exactly circular. So these are smart fellows. They came out Copernicus, in 1500 something. And he came up with this model and wrote all about that. He also wrote a book on economic principles. So these are, very, very advanced math and science. And then came Galileo, and there was a Italian astronomer and physicist. He was, but the telescope was invented in 1608 during the time of Galileo. So, but Galileo built an improved telescope to observe stars, Jupiter's rings even. You could see with the telescope for the first time at lunar craters and sunspots. So obviously there's a lot more out there than people knew before. And he championed the Copernican heliocentric model as well. And then he was followed by Kepler, German astronomer. And you will note that he is the German astronomer mathematician who developed the three laws of planetary motion. As I said, the Greeks were limited to thinking that the orbits of the planets around the sun was a complete circle. But Kepler determined that no, they're not circles, they're ellipses. They move, further out in one dimension than the other. So he discovered all planets actually move in elliptical orbits, and he was able to establish the laws of planetary motion. So here we are at early 1600s. We know a lot more about the Earth and the Sun and the Moon and all the planets around it, and even some stars. So very advanced. So then let's look a little bit of flat Earth history. The flat Earth was believed by some ancient cultures, let's say 400, 500, 600 BC. There are some cultures that thought, yes, the Earth is flat. That's all we can see, and it's flat as far as we can see. But you will note in the Bible and by the writings of the church fathers, they never taught that the Earth was flat. Okay, and by the time of the 1600s, 1700s, okay, the time of Kepler, Copernicus, they were really going with the heliocentric model. But then a few hundred years later, along came Samuel Rowbotham. He was a UK discoverer, and he was convinced of a flat Earth. And in 1838 AD. And why did he think that? Well, it was more that he wanted to believe the Earth was flat, and possibly he read the Bible. He read the flat Earth model into the Bible by the language that used in the Bible at that time. So how did he come up with this? Well, he used what we call the Bedford level experiment. He also published a pamphlet in his day, 1838, called Zetetic Astronomy, The Earth is Not a Globe. And here is the start of the modern flat Earth movement. He wrote the book on Zetetic Astronomy with his name in 1865 AD. So that was the start of it. And so others joined the flat Earth movement in the late 1800s. Some more books were published in the mid 1900s. And the interest in the flat Earth concept eventually, in the 1900s, started to drop off. Okay, but then along came people like Eric Dubé, who was really referred to as a flat Earth guru. He was the author of 2 books, and the books were one written in 2015. He said, "Here are 200 proofs that the Earth is not a spinning ball." And so there was another book written earlier in the previous century, I believe, that had 100 proofs that the Earth is really flat. But he came up with 200 so-called proofs. And he wrote another one of the flat Earth conspiracy. So the interest in the flat Earth in modern times increased via YouTube videos taught by non-believers as well as believers. Some people believe the Bible claims that the Earth is flat, and others did not believe this. And so this started the movement because, as you know, there are many people out there now who have YouTube channels, and they use that to promote their thinking. And so that's why the words about the flat Earth have increased over the last, the last number of decades, particularly. So that's a high level overview of how we got to today's thinking on the flat Earth. Okay, what is that Bedford level experiment that Samuel Rowbotham used in 1838? His objective was to deny the curvature of the Earth. So what he did was he found that there's a canal in the UK that you could see here is obviously very flat looking, and he watched a boat with a flag on it and its mast about 3 feet above the water, and he let it go over 6 miles, and he claimed that he could see that boat for all that 6 miles. Okay, how did he do that? Well, we'll explain. But then in 1870, along came Alfred Wallace, who happened to be a land surveyor, and he was aware of adjustments that had to be made in measurements over long distances on the Earth. So he found that the curvature of the Earth is consistent with a spherical Earth. And how did you run that experiment? Okay, let's get into that. What Rowbotham did not consider was the atmospheric refraction. You may know from science that light can change direction when it goes from the atmosphere, different density, into water at a greater density, and the light will change direction. And so also down here, here's a diagram that shows displacement of the sun's image at sunrise and sunset. When you look at the sun rising, it is coming up like here, but you can see it sooner than here. Their perceived shape and position is different from the actual position, and that's because light travels and at different distances above the Earth. There's atmospheric refraction, so that bends the light, so it makes it appear that the sun is higher up in the sky than it actually is. So atmospheric refraction is the deviation of light or other electromagnetic wave from a straight line as it passes through the atmosphere due to the variation in air density as a function of height. This refraction is due to the velocity of light through air decreasing. So the refractive index increases with increased density. The density of air decreases with height, as you can imagine, going up into the atmosphere, thousands of feet, thousands of miles. Light rays traveling nearly horizontally bend downward because of the refraction you see here. So for measurements close to the surface, the way that Rowbotham did it, the downward curve may actually match the mean curvature of the Earth's surface. And that's why he purposely used a telescope that was about 8 inches off the surface of the water. So the light was refracting, so he could actually see the that little boat that he had going over the horizon, but he could see it all the way because of refraction. So then along came Alfred Wallace, who happened to be a land surveyor, and he knew about corrections for large distances. So he observed with a telescope, but what he did to get out of the strong refraction of light, he used a pole that was 13 feet up to avoid atmospheric refraction. And he used 3 equal height poles. And his test was very, very simple. Okay, if the Earth is curved, then you would expect that these 13-foot poles that you have here, that you would not go from top to top to top, but you would actually see the pole down lower, point B. Okay, so if he looks through his telescope 13 feet up and looks at C, which is at the 6 mile point in the canal. And then if there is no curvature, if the earth really indeed is flat, then you would see the tops of all of these 13-foot poles from the telescope here. And so what did he see? He saw this picture. Okay. And and of course, he wasn't the only one. Later on, 1901, Henry Oldham was a geography teacher. He also ran the same experiment and showed the Earth curvature. And of course, over time, we were all taught in public schools that the Earth indeed is curved, it's spherical in shape. This website, by the way, flatearth.ws, is a great place to look at what flat Earth beliefs are and how they can be debunked. And this is a real experiment, and it can be repeated to show that the Earth indeed is a spherical shape. So who are the proponents today? Well, Eric Dubé, I mentioned. He produced many flat Earth videos starting in 2010. He is not a believer. He is actually a new age neo-Nazi. He doesn't believe the Bible, so he didn't use the Bible to try and prove that the Earth was flat. I mentioned Mark Sargent in that first slide and Flat Earth Dave. These people all produced and are still producing videos which claim to show that the Earth is actually flat. And a few others. There's a flat or biblical flat Earth society was founded, and then there was a claim to be Dr. Michael Heiser, who is a theologian, a doctorate in theology, and some people said he claimed that the Earth was flat. Well, no, he really believed that the Old Testament taught. It was claimed that he believed that the Old Testament taught a flat Earth, but that's not true. However, there is a pastor in Alabama, Pastor Dean Ottle, and you can find him on the internet. He is actually a pastor who believes in a flat Earth and teaches flat Earth, using the Bible and various translations of the Bible. So there are pastors out there who teach that the Earth is flat, but of course, as you come to the end here, we will see that they have been deceived by Robotham, his teaching. So what do flat earthers say? How do they show that the Earth is flat? What are their claims? Well, they said gravity makes no sense. There's no such thing as gravity, they say. In fact, they said if things are held up or that fall because of buoyancy and density of the medium. And in some cases, yes, you can show that balloons float and heavy objects fall. And so their buoyancy and density has something to say about that. There was a water doesn't curve, water finds its own level using electromagnetic force. So in other words, water doesn't curve over if the Earth was a sphere, the water would run off. And the other thing they claim, how can water stick to a ball spinning at 1,000 miles per hour? And of course, we know that's gravity. But if you look at, if you're at the equator and it takes 24 hours to go around. Now, if the circumference is 25,000 miles, then you're moving at a little bit more than 1,000 miles per hour. And if the Earth is, so they can't understand how that could possibly be. But of course, gravity, the force of gravity does explain that. They would say water cannot flow up, because if if the Earth were the sphere and there's a high mountain in the middle, and the north is lower, then the water can't run up. It can't flow up. If there's a mountain that is further to the north, water can't climb that. Well, of course, it can if it's going down. So they are perplexed about how the Earth's atmosphere exists next to a vacuum of space. They don't believe in space beyond those, the dome being 3,000 miles up. They said that there's space doesn't exist. They say, well, we shouldn't see this thing, but I do. In other words, they shouldn't. If the Earth is a sphere and the ship is going over, then I shouldn't see it, but I do because the Earth is flat. So the Earth is closer to the sun in the summer than in the winter, and they would claim that science is a religion. In other words, they think of scientism. And of course, we as scientists, we stay away from scientism because science is never settled. And so scientism is just a bad term. And they would claim that we have all been indoctrinated by government teachers, etc. I mentioned, again, Eric Dubé. He wrote that book, 200 Proofs that the Earth is not a spinning ball. He is actually a yoga instructor living in Thailand, came across century-old writings of Robotham. Again, this goes back to Robotham. He didn't come up with this on his own. He read Robotham and then tried to come up with proofs that it indeed was true. So he is credited with rekindling the flat earth movement. So this book was published in 2015. I've looked at some of his proofs, and they make assumptions, and they cannot be proven to be true. And that book is readily available on the internet for those that have an interest in that. So then we come to what does the Bible actually teach? And net, I would say the Bible does not have a lot to say about the shape of the earth. However, some translations and people looking at these say that there are about 200 flat earth Bible verses. Many of these verses are dealing with other issues different from whether the earth is flat or spherical, geocentric or heliocentric. Different genre, history. If you look at the verses in the Bible, we see some are history, some are poetic, some are allegorical, and we have to translate them, within their context, because the meaning depends on the context, grammatical or literary. Many alleged FE flat earth verses from poetic books. Some alleged flat earth verses talk about the land and not the planet. Okay, and there's use of equivocal or idiomatic language that they would translate as, hey, this shows that the earth is flat, but really it's just idiomatic language. And then they cherry pick certain verses that are not found in all translations. The modern translations are obviously more recent and more consistent. So as I said up at the beginning, flat earth is never taught throughout church history. So then we look at these.
Dr. Heinz, I was just going to stop you for a second because I've got some feedback from the audience. Okay. And when your phone starts to buzz, your audio when you're speaking, it drowns out, and so we can't at times hear the entirety of your point.
Okay, let me I'm going to just turn it off totally.
No worries. And as you do that, I'll remind the audience that we will be doing, as usual with these live presentations, we will be having an audience Q&A. So it looks like we've got a good mix of skeptics and non-skeptics in the live chat for tonight's Flat Earth Talk. So please, if you have questions, if you have challenges and objections, make sure you're tagging me at Standing for Truth. And I'll save those and we'll have some fun interacting with them. Dr. Heinz, the floor is yours. Go ahead.
Okay. So again, remember I mentioned there's about 200 so-called, what some people claim are flat Earth kind of verses. But there are two scientists from Creation Ministries International. One is Dr. Rob Carter, who I mentioned before, and Dr. Jonathan Sarfati. Both, I know them personally, of course, and they're very, very good scientists and biblical scholars. So they looked at these 200 verses and classified them in three different categories. One, verses that have nothing to do with flat Earth argument. They're not on topic. They're not talking about the shape of the Earth. Second, there's verses that are ambiguous in relation to the shape of the Earth. They use equivocal language. And a proper analysis would require a decent knowledge of ancient languages and the context, or at least a careful reading of scholarly sources that discuss the passage in question. Then the third are verses that involve a misreading of non-modern English terminology in some older versions, often cherry-picked. In classical terms, it's called lying. It's not the truth. So they took all these 200 verses and put it in these three classifications. There's another theologian, Jason Churchill, Dr. Jason Churchill, who also did a complete study of all these controversial verses. And I have captured those recordings of all of that analysis. It's on my website. Remember my website, and then I have a /flat-earth. If you look there, you'll see all the work done with this Dr. Jason Churchill, and he comes to the same conclusion that we do here about those verses. So then, but there's four terms that are used by those people that believe in a flat Earth, and I just want to highlight a few of them and see what are they really saying. Four corners of the earth. That term is used a number of times in the Bible, not a whole lot, but there are a few. So four corners of the earth, that seems to imply that it should be flat. So if you read these verses in Isaiah, he will raise a signal for the nations and will assemble the banished of Israel and gather the dispersed of Judah from the four corners of the earth. Okay. And the same thing, Revelation 7:1. After this, I saw four angels standing at the four corners of the earth. In Revelation 20, and when the 1,000 years are ended, Satan will be released from his prison and will come out to receive the nations that are at the four corners of the earth, Gog and Magog. Okay. So what do we make of that? Well, that's really an idiomatic expression. Okay. The earth, even for flat earth people, they can't use it. I mean, the four corners would imply something like a square or a rectangle, shape of the earth. But we're not talking about that. This is an idiomatic expression. And even the flat earth people would have trouble explaining that, because even the flat earth model, the earth is a disk. Okay, so where are the corners? They don't exist. So it's clearly an idiomatic expression. Then we come to the ends of the earth. That phrase appears 28 times in the Bible, and just a few verses here in Psalm 67. May God bless us all, bless us still, so that all the ends of the earth will fear him. The ends of the earth will fear him. Psalm 98. All the ends of the earth have seen the salvation of our God. And then Isaiah 45, turn to me and be saved, all the ends of the earth, for I am God and there is no other. So the ends of the earth, is that talking about shape of the earth? No, it's talking about people. It's not referring to geography or the shape of the earth at all. It's talking about people at different parts of the earth. So they come from all parts of the earth, all the ends of the earth. So again, this is the flat earth people is that it's an improper meaning that they give to that. Then you come to pillars. Many of these verses are found in poetic books, so they can't be taken as literally. So like Job 9:6, he shakes the earth out of its place and its pillars tremble. When the earth totters and all its inhabitants, it is I who keep steady its pillars. 93, indeed the world is firmly established, it will not be moved. And see some flat earth where people would say, well, the earth is static, it's not moving. Okay, many of these verses are actually in poetic books. They use imagery and are not meant to be literal language. Firmament and dome. Okay, this is based on the Hebrew word rakia, and it's interpreted as dome over the earth in the flat earth model. So go back to Genesis 1, verses 6 to 8. They claim that the dome is that firmament over the earth, but that is not what it means. It's based on the verb, this word rakia is based on the word raka, which it means to spread out. And in the modern translation, the spread out, that is the meaning that is given and is translated as the expanse in most modern translations. So Genesis 1:14 to 19, place the sun, moon, and stars in rakia. So it's in the expanse. Genesis 1:20 talks about birds flying across the face of the rakia. So rakia is really the space and the earth's atmosphere. Sometimes the word sky is used for that. So it's whatever, the air that's above the earth. It's the expanse above the earth. So again, those are just the wrong interpretations. Now, are there any verses that talk about the earth shape being a sphere? Well, yes, there are some that could be interpreted that way, but the flat earth people would even say, well, it's not necessarily that. In Isaiah 40:20, it is he who sits above the circle of the earth, who stretches out the heavens like a curtain and spreads them out like a tent to dwell in. The circle of the earth. Well, a circle, it could be a flat circle, or it could be a sphere. And of course, the flat earth people are going to take that as a flat circle. But then here, Job 26:7, he stretches out the north over the void and hangs the earth on nothing. What does that mean? How do you deal with that in a flat earth model? You can't. Because remember some of the ancient cultures, they talked about the earth resting on the back of a turtle or on the back of an elephant, or like this. Well, here Job 26 has it right. He stretches out the north or the void and hangs the earth on nothing. Today we know that the earth is out there. It's a spherical ball, and there's no string holding it up, or there's nothing it's resting on. It hangs on nothing. 26:10, he's inscribed a circle in the face of the waters and the boundary between light and darkness. Proverbs 8:27, when he established the heavens, I was there, and when he drew a circle in the face of the deep. So there's about, if you look at them, and there's a website here, you can look at more of them. Some of them they're not very clear, but you can certainly interpret them as a spherical Earth and not a flat Earth. Okay. So now we get to the meat of this talk, and that is, what evidence do we have, as scientists that say that the Earth is actually a sphere, it's not flat. And I'm going to walk through 12 of these. So let me just go through this list quickly and just get to each one of these 12. You can see the ones I'm going to cover here. And you can be thinking about them, whether we get to them. Okay, so those 12, what I would claim, these are some evidences that people use to say the Earth indeed is spherical. And there are others, but I've just picked these, these 12. So the ship disappearing over the horizon, and you're familiar with this, of course. I mean, a ship close to shore, and you're watching it here, and it looks pretty big. And then as it gets miles further away, the hull drops, and you don't see it anymore after a while. Mathematically, how do you do the calculation? How far should the horizon drop in 1 mile, 10 miles, 30 miles away? And you can calculate that using trigonometry. So here we know the radius, of course we assume a spherical Earth for that. We know the radius is about 4,000 miles, and then the distance away that you see an object is d, and then the h is the height above the surface, which drops down with the distance, of course. And so if you use Pythagorean theorem, r squared, this r squared plus d squared equals r plus h squared. When using r, it's 4,000, and for small h, you can ignore the size of h compared to r, and so you can. The equation comes out to be h is d squared over 2r. So d is, for 1 mile, the height is only 8 inches that the horizon drops off, and 6 miles, 24 feet, and this happened to be the distance for the canal that Rowbotham used, 6 miles, and he said if it was circular, it should drop 24 feet, but because of refraction and all that, it doesn't quite do that. So if in fact refraction allows one to see further, because you can see slightly over the horizon, and bending light around the curve, and temperature and pressure differences. So this has been shown to be true. Here's one example. If you look at Toronto, there is a CNN tower that's 1,815 feet high. Now, if you are 30, I believe it's about 39 miles away from Olcott, New York, that's on the other side of Lake Ontario there, you don't see this as 1,800 feet. You see it as less, because because it does fall off. There's some refraction, but it does fall off. And this is only, let's see, it's 600 feet less, with that kind of distance. So you're seeing the top of it, not the bottom of it. So this is, expected in a spherical Earth. And I talk about the atmospheric refraction again. It's not constant, because if the entire building is not visible, then there is low refraction. In other words, you're looking over the curved Earth, you won't see the top if there's low refraction. If there's medium refraction, you can see part of it. And if the building is, if the high refraction, the entire building could be visible from a long distance. So that can be explained for a spherical Earth, cannot be explained with a flat Earth. Even in ancient days, people said, look at the lunar eclipses. We can see with the lunar eclipse, Earth's shadow crosses the face of the moon. And it looks like, a curved, not a straight line, but a curve. You can see them here as it proceeds. The curve is different here. Okay, and the moon looks to be a sphere as well. So it's the shadow of the Earth on the moon, and that indicates that the moon and the Earth are both spherical. Okay, next, solar eclipse. How do you explain that from a flat Earth model? Well, here's the sun and the moon in between the sun and the Earth, and in the spherical Earth, we know we can explain how that shadow falls on the Earth, and there is an umbra area that blacks out the sun totally, and then there's a penumbra which it doesn't blank out all of it, but most of it. So we can explain the total solar eclipse with a spherical model. And so then you ask the question, how do flat Earth people explain that? And we'll get back to that when we look at the challenges. Now, and if you look into the sky, and especially with a telescope now, all of these bodies, they seem to be spherical. So why isn't the Earth also spherical? For the classical planets, remember those classical planets are ones that you could see without a telescope. They're visible to the naked eye. They move across the sky, and there are fixed stars in the background, like the Polaris. They're fixed in space. The planet is referred to as a wanderer by the Greeks. These are referred to as classical planets. So after the telescope was made, the first telescope, you could see that very clearly. Another piece of evidence is, in the early days, the old days, people didn't travel very far, so they didn't consider the fact that the sun is rising at a different time at long distances away. But in your village and neighboring towns, you don't see that at all. So that's why they invented the notion of zones, time zones. And so today, commerce and trade require the use of time zones, because obviously the sun is rising at different times in different parts of the world. So, but surprisingly, this was not introduced until the 18th century. But there was a scientist in the 13th century, John Saccarobba Bosco. He said this. He made this observation, that the Earth too is round, is shown thus. In other words, this shows that the Earth is round. The signs and stars do not rise and set the same for all men everywhere, but rise and set sooner for those in the east than for those in the west. And of this, there is no other cause than the bulge of the Earth. So back in the 13th century, here's a believer. He knew the Bible, and he said, and he observed that the sun didn't rise at the same time at every place. And, we have examples of, people flying weather balloons or, at great distance above the Earth, you can see the curvature of the Earth. So that's a pretty simple observation. Another one here, in the days of the Apollo astronauts, when they landed on the moon, the Earth and moon seen from Apollo 11, you could clearly see the picture of the Earth, those 230,000 miles away. And today, we have the International Space Station, a very complicated piece of gear here, hundreds of feet in size in all dimensions. But it is rotating or orbiting the Earth at 17,500 miles per hour. It's 250 miles up. And so they're obviously then they can observe the curvature of the Earth from there. So this one has been up in the space for 25 years, and they have research staff up there making observations all the time. So this is real. This is a space shuttle service. Here's a snapshot of the Earth from the International Space Station, and obviously it's very, very curved. Here's a space astronaut watching outside, doing a spacewalk, and behind him you can see that curved Earth. There was a Hubble Space Telescope. This is an older space telescope. Geocentric orbit, low Earth orbit, about 335 miles above the period of, so it takes about 95 minutes to go around the Earth. So that's another one that could observe that the Earth is indeed spherical in shape. And then we have the recent James Webb Space Station, which is 1 million miles away from the Earth, actually, here. And the Earth is here orbiting the sun. The Webb Space Station is 1 million miles away. Why is it that far away? Because it's out of the space dust that you looking from close to Earth, you got space dust that you have to look through. 1 million miles away, it's all space is very clear and you can see much further. So, and again, this is supported by the pictures that you see. And then we have other things that we can observe. You may have heard of the so-called pendulum that you may have seen at different science museums. How does that support a spherical Earth? Well, if the Earth is indeed spherical and rotating at 1,000 miles per hour, if you have a pendulum here, this is just a conceptual diagram. So if it starts out here, and then every hour, it's going to have a different path. Okay, so it actually moves, if it goes like this, eventually it's going to go like this. And so over time, it's going to go, in a circle. So there's apparent motion of the pendulum. And why is that? It's because the Earth is actually rotating. Okay. Yeah, I had another picture of that, but I guess not on this one here. So anyway, that's what it looks like. Then you have what we call the Coriolis effect. And what is that? Well, in physics, the Coriolis force is an inertial or fictitious force that acts on objects in motion within a frame of reference. And this rotates with respect to an inertial frame. And you'll see a diagram here. If the Earth is rotating and something goes in a certain direction and it's rotating, it depends on how far it is away from the equator, of course, then it's going to move in a different direction. It is a reference frame clockwise rotation. The force acts to the left of the motion of the object, and one of these with anti-clockwise or counterclockwise rotation, the force acts to the right. So it's a deflection of an object due to the Coriolis force, and that's called the Coriolis effect. And you see this in pictures of hurricanes, because hurricanes, rotate counterclockwise in the northern hemisphere. In other words, the hurricanes you know, you can see the rotation in the weather patterns. They go counterclockwise in the northern hemisphere and clockwise in the southern hemisphere. And that's all due to the Coriolis effect, which is caused by the rotation of the Earth. And here's what you can see the difference. In the northern hemisphere, you can see here the center, and it is rotating counterclockwise. Down south, you have we call them cyclones down there, but there it's moving to the left. Okay, and that is because of the effect of the Coriolis effect. It's different in the northern hemisphere than it is in the southern hemisphere. Let's see. So here again is another picture of the celestial poles. We have the north celestial pole with the south celestial pole, and you have there's a star you can see from the northern hemisphere, from part of the northern hemisphere, which is the Polaris, which is almost directly over the North Pole. And then in the southern hemisphere, you have the similar star called the Southern Cross. So in the northern hemisphere, you can see Polaris. In the southern hemisphere, you cannot see Polaris. Okay, and then vice versa. In the southern hemisphere, you can see the Southern Cross, but you can't see Polaris. So clearly, that is can be explained with the spherical space. Spherical shape of the Earth. How do you explain that in a flat Earth? A big circle, flat Earth. You don't. You can see the Polaris, but you can't see. How do you see the Southern Cross? You cannot explain that. And here again, another way to look at it is through the movement of the stars. In the northern hemisphere, the stars rotate anti-clockwise. Okay, if you take a timed picture of that, you can see the movement of the stars in the anti-clockwise. In the southern hemisphere, they appear to revolve clockwise. And we won't take the time here, but you could actually click on these links here in the PDF file, and you can see that action here going to the left, counterclockwise and clockwise. So those are 12 evidence that we use to show that indeed the Earth is spherical in shape. So then you look at the flat Earth model, and you ask the questions, how does the flat Earth model explain this? Laws of nature, physics, and astronomy. What causes tides in a flat Earth? Okay, all these, I'm just going to step through these quickly, these 12 things that we're going to look at and ask the flat Earth people, how do you explain this? So the first one, just the basic laws of physics, of nature, physics, astronomy, chemistry, and all that. How do you, if those laws are not real laws, then how do you explain that? How do you explain Newton's 3 laws of motion? How do you explain Kepler's 3 laws of planetary motion if those planets really aren't out there that far? We talked about the law of refraction, Archimedes' principle of buoyancy. And so if these are not real laws, then how do you explain that? And it turns out you can't. Here's a little bit more, Newton's laws, the first law of motion, force equals mass times acceleration. Third law, every action has a reaction. The force of gravity force equal to the gravitational constant times mass of 1 to mass 2 divided by the distance squared. So we can measure the force of gravity, and we can see the action of it. The bodies move according to these laws of motion. And Kepler's laws of planetary motion, how can you even consider them in a flat Earth model? Because these talk about the movement of planets, which are millions of miles away. And of course, in the view of the flat Earth, they don't really exist. Ocean tides. How do we explain them? Well, they're caused by gravity. The differential force of gravity from the sun and the moon cause bulges. And so we know that by the moon mostly, but the sun also has a force on that. Not as strong as the moon, but it does have. So lunar tide is twice as high as the solar tide. Lunar and solar tides occur at different frequencies. The tides cannot be explained by the flat Earth concept. Okay, if you look at Dubai, the man with the 200 proofs that the Earth is flat, he says clearly in proof numbers 117 and 118, he cannot explain how that works. We have not solved that problem yet. So again, there's no way to explain tides in the flat Earth model. Obviously you're very familiar with this, and the tide difference here. You can see this wall here, water, and here totally dry. And now here's one that I can relate to because I flew from Los Angeles to Boston and back many times in my business. And you very well know that the time to fly from Los Angeles to Boston is 5 hours and a half, roughly. But in the return flight, it is more like 6 hours and 20 minutes. How do you explain the difference? Well, you can explain it by the spherical Earth because of the rotation of the Earth, the movement of the circuits, the wind circuits. At the flight, at the height that these planes fly at, they can explain that difference in time. How do you explain that in the flat Earth model? There is no way to do that. Here's another one. In last year, June 3rd, we had the alignment of 6 planets: Saturn, Neptune, Mars, Uranus, Mercury, and Jupiter. You could see them from the Earth. You could see them all in a line. And that can be explained because of the rotation, the period of the orbit, and all that. You can explain why that occurs. In a flat Earth model, there's no way to explain that. Here's another difference. In the spherical Earth, the Earth has a diameter of 8,000 miles, circumference of 25,000 miles. Moon has a diameter of 2160 miles. The sun is 400 times the size of the moon. Sun is 109 times the size of the Earth. Sun is 93 million miles away from the Earth. The moon is 239,000 miles from the Earth. And the stars are outside of the solar system. Okay, so that's what we see from a point of view of a spherical Earth. From a flat Earth concept, you have the Earth is a round disk. You see here, where it's 25,000 miles in diameter across. The dome is 3,000 miles above the Earth, and the sun and moon are each about the same size, 32 miles in diameter, and they are rotating above the Earth. The sun at once a day, and the moon at once every 28 or so days in orbit. So they rotate above the Earth under the dome. The stars and the 5 visible planets are in the dome itself. Okay, so how do you explain that? You know, a very significant difference in concept there. And there's no way to explain, well, many different things, many things that we observe every day, like eclipses and things like that. Then they remember the sun in the model of the flat Earth is a spotlight sun. It is not, some body above the Earth and how do you explain that it covers just a section of the Earth? You have to come up with this spotlight model. And that was introduced by Robotham because he had no other way to explain that the sun covered just part of the Earth at a time. So how does the sun rise? How does it set? Okay, the observer A is at sunrise, observer B at noon. The sun size observed can differ by 6 times in the flat Earth model. They just don't address that. So here, if the sun here is indeed just a little less than 3,000 miles above the Earth, you can see here, but somebody standing over here that's also observing the sun, that difference in distance could be 6 times as much as here. So of course, the person standing right under the sun is going to see a larger body than somebody standing 6 times further away. So how do you explain that the sun and the moon are equal size? In this model, you can't. It's impossible. And sunrise and sunset, how do you explain that in a flat Earth? Where's the sun going? After it goes, as it's setting and as it's rising, where does it come from? How do you explain the sunset and sunrise? Some other issues, how do the sun and the moon here in the flat Earth model rotate in the sky without gravity? What keeps them going? What force keeps them going? Sunrise, sunset are never below the horizon. There's no way for the sun to get under the edge here. You can't explain what caused a lunar eclipse. Can't predict the start, stop, or trajectory of a solar eclipse. And during sunrise, we observed the top of a mountain illuminated before the foothills. Okay, think of that. You see in a spherical Earth, we observe the top of the mountain illuminated before the foothills, but not with a flat Earth. That doesn't happen because it reaches that mountain earlier than the top of the mountain. So you can never illuminate the ice wall at the same time. Okay, if the Antarctica doesn't exist, then how can you illuminate the whole ice wall at the same time? What causes the Earth's magnetic field? Can't explain 4 seasons. Can't explain solstices, summer, winter, equinoxes very well. And here's the, shows a big picture of the solstice. Where the Earth in the spherical model, it's at an angle, 24 degrees or so at an angle, and so it's starting from here, it goes around, and then the sun, illuminates a different part of the Earth, and during the summer, of course, you can see the Arctic Circle, above the Arctic Circle. And then you come to the autumn, and again, you're illuminating a different part of the Earth. And then you get to the winter solstice, and then the sun can see the Antarctica, in this spherical model. So in a flat Earth, you should never be able to see that. Okay, so we'll see that in a bit more. So you have the yeah, again, showing this another way, the Earth orbiting the sun, and it's an elliptical orbit. It's not a pure circular orbit. And you see the sun hits at a different tropic of Cancer and the tropic of Capricorn, which is below the equator. Okay, so it's different. And you have a South Pole and you have a North Pole. So you don't see that in a flat Earth model. And this explains it in a little bit more detail. The polar night, the Antarctic Circle. There's no days of 0 hours of daylight because the sun doesn't hit that part in the spherical model. And in the December solstice, it does see the bottom part of the Earth, the Antarctic Circle. So how do you explain that in a flat Earth model? And here's another one. Just think of it. Here is the a solar eclipse, the total solar eclipse, and we had one that we could observe in the U.S., different parts of the U.S. It happened on April 8th, 2024, and we could predict exactly when that eclipse is going to happen and where it's going to travel, which cities is it going to come close to. And this is roughly about 100 miles wide, that path through the U.S. And here are the cities which it came close to. We knew exactly when that's going to happen. How do you do that with a flat Earth model? And how does the moon get in between the sun and the Earth if they're both rotating above the Earth? The sun and the moon cannot interact that way, as we see the total solar eclipse or even partial eclipses. Another challenge for the flat earthers, they will say that there are no satellites in space. They just don't exist. They say these are all pictures taken by NASA, or they were pictures created by NASA, photoshopped or otherwise. But from a circular Earth, spherical Earth model, we know that these satellites exist. We talked about the International Space Station. You're all familiar with GPS. Those satellites are up there at 12,550 miles above the Earth. But if the Earth is covered with a dome with 3,000 feet high, they say, well, these can't exist. So how does GPS happen? Well, GPS must be done by measuring the distance from the cell towers, and they use those calculations to do GPS. Well, show me the program which does that. It just doesn't work. So we have many different kind of satellites up there, and but the flat Earth people will not recognize these at all. Many different kinds of orbits, low Earth orbit, medium Earth, geostationary orbit, and highly elliptical orbits, all different kinds of orbits. And there are thousands of satellites up there. So look at GPS. Okay, this is a picture of the Earth. There are 24 satellites revolving around the Earth twice at an altitude of 12,500 miles above the Earth. And we can tell where we are because we can see, a number of satellites, anywhere from, I believe there's about 3 or 4, all the way up to 9 or 10 visible satellites. And we can use those signals from those satellites to determine exactly where we are. And in fact, because the distance is so large, 12,500 miles, you've got to correct the time that it takes for light to go from the satellite to the place on Earth. And so the special and general relativity predicted that clocks on GPS satellites, as observed by those on Earth, they run 38 microseconds faster per day than those on the Earth. So you have to make that correction. Because if the GPS did not correct for this difference, there would be an error of about 6 miles per day generated. So that's not very useful. So you cannot explain GPS from a flat Earth model. Land surveying. One of my sons is a land surveyor, and he tells me that, yes, sometimes they do have to make corrections for curvature of the Earth and for refraction. However, that's only for large distances. Most land surveying is in short distance, and you don't have to make those corrections. But there are books, some of them listed here, which explain how you make those corrections in the land surveying equipment. Another one here. If you have a battle going on in the sea, there is, and you're trying to hit a ship, many miles away, you have to make correction for the curvature of the Earth and refraction. And so both of those have to be done to measure what direction you shoot the bullets in, the missiles in, to hit your target. Okay, and that can be calculated. Yeah, here's a table, a range table. This comes from a U.S. Navy manual, so we don't need to read all the numbers, but further out, how many yards you have to make a correction by degrees and yards and feet and all that, and so it recognized the fact that the corrections are necessary. If the Earth was flat, you wouldn't have any of this to it. Okay, and then number 12 is the, I would say the Antarctica cannot be an ice wall. Okay, they say that the Antarctica is not a continent. It's an ice wall around the flat Earth. So, but we know that it is the fifth largest continent in the world, behind some of the obvious other large continents like North America and South America. There is a map with the South Pole camps and stations that you can see here. There's part of the map. And the other thing that you note here, you see that different countries have different licenses to run experiments and navigate in different parts of this Antarctic circle. And you can see here, this is Australian claim here, Norwegian claim, a British claim, and so on. It's dividing up the pie. How do you do that if it's a flat Earth and you've got an ice wall? And further, here's a picture of Antarctica taken from a space station, 1990. You can definitely see here's the ice in the Antarctica. It's a land mass, underneath. It's not a wall. Flat Earth assumptions. Okay, they have to make assumptions to come up with their model. They believe gravity is not a law of nature. They think things fall down because of density and buoyancy. They say the Earth is stationary, does not rotate. These are their assumptions, not observations, but assumptions. They say space does not exist. It is meaningless to talk about objects that can orbit the Earth. Newton's 3 laws of motion are fake. Kepler's 3 laws of planetary motion are fake. They really don't work. There are no satellites or space stations. Astronauts have not been to the moon. And NASA lied about everything they claimed. NASA photos from and in space are fake. Some were photoshopped. And Antarctica is an ice wall around the Earth disk. These are assumptions they make. If these assumptions can be proven, shown to be false, then their conclusions are also false. And I believe it's not too hard to show that all of these assumptions are false. And therefore, the conclusions made by those that believe in flat Earth cannot possibly be correct. I talked about the final experiment. Basically, as it's explained here, this is an experiment that was proposed actually by a pastor in Colorado. He challenged flat Earth people to show that the sun does not shine in the Antarctica, for 24-hour days. So this is how we explain the experiment. The final experiment is a way to settle the shape of the Earth debate. Both the flat Earth side and the globe side agree that whether or not there is a 24-hour sun in Antarctica will confirm if we live on a flat plane or on a globe. A 24-hour sun cannot work on a flat plane in the south, and the sun cannot set on a globe during the southern summer. So that's the challenge. A few flat earthers, I believe it was 3 flat earthers, took up the challenge and say, okay, we'll go down there and check that out. And so some flat earth people and also some people that believe in the spherical earth went down to observe in December when there could be sun in the Antarctica. So here, remember there's a map of the Antarctica, and of course the flat Earth people say no, it's really an ice wall. But you'll notice in the map that these places were mentioned: McMurdo Station, Union Glacier Camp, and Wichita camps. If the Antarctica is indeed a ice wall, then they're going to be tens of thousands of miles apart. But we saw on the map of Antarctica that they are only thousands of miles apart, not tens of thousands. So this doesn't match what we see. So again, here's the map from a spherical Earth-shaped point of view. And here are those camps that you can see in here. And you can see how far away they are. They're not very far, hundreds of miles or thousands of miles. And so these are the three places that they observed at. And they're all shown here. There's actually shown here how some people have actually traveled from New Zealand over the Antarctica. So if Antarctica is a circle, an ice wall, then they could not have done that, what they did here. So the conclusion was that, first of all, of the 3 flat earthers that went to observe this experiment, they had to conclude, yes, the sun does shine for 24 hours in the Antarctica at certain times in the winter. And so one of the flat earthers changed his mind about the shape of the Earth. The second one, who is a well-known flat earther, he said, yes, I see that the sun shines there. There must be another explanation from a flat Earth point of view. So he's still investigating it from a flat Earth point of view. So in conclusion, I would say some ancient cultures did believe in a flat Earth, The Bible text does not require a flat earth. We saw that. Two teams of theologians and scientists have determined that. The observations from the 5th century BC to the 19th century AD showed the Earth to be a rotating sphere. An incomplete experiment by Rowbotham in 1835 renewed interest in a flat Earth. He's the one that started this deception of a flat Earth being real. The scientific observations show the Earth to be a sphere. The flat Earth model fails to explain observations. Those 12 challenges I put to them, there's no way that you can explain them from a flat Earth perspective. And why is belief in a flat Earth expanding? Well, because of the wide use of social media has revived interest in a flat Earth, and some people are just convinced it must be flat. The assumptions made by flat earthers, those 12 assumptions I put up there, they cannot be verified. And if they cannot be verified, then the conclusions they come to must also be false. The spherical Earth is supported by the Bible and by science. And the reason why we have these people that believe in a flat Earth, you can take that all the way back to Rowbotham, who came up with zetetic astronomy in 1849, based on the experiment that he did in 1838. That it all goes back to that. So what is the deception? Well, he's the person that first introduced these three features, that the flat disk Earth is centered at the North Pole, that the Antarctic is really an ice wall, it's not a continent, and that the sun revolves as a spotlight under a 3,000-mile high dome. He came up with this, not based on measurements. None of this is based on measurement. This is based on what the model needed in order to support his belief. So the zetetic method of empirical observations is all from perspective, not from measurement, but from perspective. And atmospheric effects explain the apparent sun's rising and setting without going under the Earth. So the atmospheric effects, what are atmospheric effects? I don't know, but they cannot explain the apparent rising and setting of the sun. This method emphasizes direct observations. In other words, if you believe in a flat Earth, you have observed it and you have experienced something that says the Earth is flat. You have not done your measurements. It's just a perception. And this is over and above established scientific theories or assumptions. So this, again, the method is influenced by literal interpretation of biblical passages and 19th century tension between science and religion. So they rejected mainstream astronomy. The major tenets of zetetic astronomy: flat Earth as a stationary plane, sun, moon, stars move above the Earth, sun's rising and setting is due to perspective. There is no curvature or rotation. Knowledge is derived from direct observation and sensory experience, not from theoretical models or trust in scientific authority. The Antarctic ice wall is a boundary, and celestial bodies are not what they seem. In other words, those satellites, those planets out there are not what they seem to be. And they reject the law of gravity. So, and they are skeptical of scientific institutions. So this is the major tenets of their astronomy or their philosophy. So with that, I bring that to a conclusion. There's a lot of material we covered there, and I'm sure there must be some questions about that. Just to summarize my website, all the pointers to everything is in my website with 2025 messages. These are the messages I've done this year. And as you remember on the first slide, you can go to my website here, heinzlyclama.com/flat earth. And I have copious notes and evidence for the conclusions I've come to on that web page. Lots of stuff there that you can peruse. So anyway, thank you for your time, and I hope it's been enlightening for people as to making the difference between a spherical Earth and a flat Earth belief.
Dr. Heinz, that was an excellent, comprehensive presentation. I look forward to digging into that even more, as it's one of those presentations that you need to watch several times, I believe, in order to fully digest and absorb all those points, in light of the fact that the flat Earth position has kind of made a resurgence. I think that is must-watch viewing for everybody. You've also generated a lot of discussion, a lot of healthy discussion in our live chat, as we've had a good mix, Dr. Heinz, of flat earthers and non-flat earthers. So we do have quite a few comments to get through. I do have up here for anybody to see. I've got Doki Doki, appreciate that, my chat mod. Check out Dr. Heinz' website. I've got it linked here in the live chat, but also in the description box for people to check out. As Dr. Heinz, as you said, you've given 25 messages this year, and excellent work. I appreciate you upholding the truth of Christianity. This is your second talk here, and a lot of positive feedback. People saying, thank you, Dr. Heinz. Great presentation. Okay, so I took a lot of notes, of course, because it was an extensive presentation, which is what we need. And I'd like to touch on a few of them. To summarize everything, what I'm seeing based on your presentation, Dr. Heinz, especially on the science side of it, it appears to me to continue to hold up a flat Earth model, one would have to invoke massive conspiracies, magical physics, or wholesale denial, really, of visible, measurable phenomena like the sunset, eclipses, star paths, etc. And to me, that's a far less simple and coherent model than a globe. And you touched on one point that I find fascinating, the final experiment. And so we had Will Duffy, he's the one who ran the final experiment. We had him on for a seminar where he covered all the details, the findings. You had mentioned a major flat earther converted, several flat earthers converted, as a matter of fact. And then we hosted a 4-hour debate seminar between Will Duffy and a prominent flat earther. And moderating that debate just showed me even more how bankrupt really the flat earth position is. But on the final experiment, which you focused there near the end, Dr. Heinz, it's interesting because flat earthers said and this is why many converted. Flat earthers said for 10 years that Antarctica holds the key to the true shape of the earth, and that's why you can't go there. They also claim that the 24-hour sun in Antarctica on the globe model doesn't actually exist. There wouldn't be a 24-hour sun because the earth is flat. But they had no choice but to say this, because a 24-hour sun in the south can't work on a flat earth, right? So Will Duffy, he took 4 flat earthers and 4 globe earthers to Antarctica last December. And this was a testable prediction. Okay, is there going to be a 24-hour sun? So you have the globe earth here, and then you got the flat earth here. Or is there not going to be a 24-hour sun? So testable prediction, which is what we like in science.
Right.
And what they saw was the 24-hour sun with their own eyes. The sun apparently never set the entire 4 days that they were there, which, I mean, at the end of the day, how does a flat earther address that, Dr. Heinz?
Well, there is no scientific way of addressing that I see. There is one I'm trying to think of his name, that he agreed that the sun did shine for 24 hours for those days. But he said there must be another explanation. But I have not seen his explanation yet. I don't know if that was discussed in that 4 hour debate at all. But I have not seen a clear explanation from a flat Earth perspective for that.
Right. Well, they struggled for a while after, then they invoked several rescue devices that have major problems. I haven't seen, even from the most prominent or informed flat earthers, I haven't seen any good evidence. But I'd also like to touch on this. So several comments came in, and a lot of comments kind of avoided your questions, because what I really liked about your comprehensive talk, Dr. Heinz, is that you would present a point and then ask the flat earther, how do you address this? How does a flat earther account for this? What is their model? How do they explain this according to a flat earth? And we have a lot of flat earthers in the comments, rather than, we appreciate flat earthers being here. Hopefully we can plant some seeds, but I'm seeing an avoidance to address your questions and the challenges. And instead I see several comments that I can kind of merge into one, where they're basically implying that we're rejecting what the scripture clearly says. But you address that, the scriptural issue. And I'm curious as to your thoughts, because when I bring in and connect several different texts, it's these texts as a whole seem to favor the globe earth rather than a flat earth. For example, Isaiah 40 verse 22 says that earth is a circle, implying roundness, not a flat disc. Job 26:7 I've always been fascinated by, where it talks about how God hangs the earth upon nothing,
Right.
which would imply gravity, free float in space. I picture a Christmas tree. It's Christmas time with a round spherical ornament hanging from the tree. So that's not describing the earth hanging on pillars or an ice wall.
Right.
Luke 17:34-36, we have simultaneous day and night across the globe, where some people will be in their beds at nighttime. Other people will be working in the day at the time of his second coming. And then Job 26:10, I think it is, God inscribes a circular horizon, which from my understanding is only possible on a sphere. So my question to you, Dr. Heinz, do those scriptures come together, and maybe they don't prove a spherical earth, but they're consistent with a spherical earth, and they contradict a flat disk?
Well, you can argue about that. I mean, like I said, you can say that refers to a circle, which can be, a circle on a disk,
right?
Or it can be a sphere. That can be used to take any one of those. And of course, you have to consider that people back in the time of Christ and before were really not thinking much. Certainly the common person wouldn't be thinking much about that. It looks flat, but they see that the sun setting and the sun rising. They can explain that with a spherical, but in a flat Earth, where does the sun go? The latest flat Earth explanation, of course, was the spotlight. Okay, but we have enough technology that if there was a spotlight sun 3,000 miles up, we should be able to determine exactly what that looks like. But the flat earther cannot explain that. It just that they need something to say, why only part of the earth is covered by the sun. So they robots came up with that model. I've not seen any other model that would, from a flat earth perspective, that would explain that. And even that doesn't explain everything.
Right. That's an excellent point. And more challenges to those that want to hold the flat earth position. Here's a common one, Dr. Heinz. As the flat earth proponents made their way into the live chat, I asked them to present what they believe are the best reasons for why they hold to a flat Earth. And so here's a comment from Kimberly Mills. Kimberly, I appreciate it. She says, well, because there is no measurable, and obviously a lot of what the comments have said, you addressed so extensively in your presentation. So I think a lot of these answers might comprise you reiterating some of these important points, because she and several others mentioned, well, there is no measurable curvature. And so that's more consistent with a flat Earth, they'll say. What's the best way to engage that?
Well, there is a measurable curvature. You can, but then you have to believe that you can have a satellite, above the Earth, or you can have a space station, above the Earth that can observe the Earth. How do you explain that curvature? And we have instrumentation today that is very precise, that could measure things exactly. So there's no, they're saying there's no way to measure the curvature. Well, there is many ways to measure it, but then you have to, break one of your assumptions that there are no satellites in space.
Right. Well, you had mentioned as well the James Webb Space Telescope and these incredibly sophisticated images of distant galaxies that we can see. And so to deny space, to deny the reality of these satellites, among other things, how do flat earthers look at something like the James Webb Space Telescope data? I got a couple points on my mind, because firstly, if you hold to the flat Earth position, then unfortunately you can't utilize these arguments that I think you and I, Dr. Heinz, would agree are fascinating evidence for a young Earth, because from my understanding, the James Webb Space Telescope images, even in your furthest reaches of the universe, the galaxies look mature. They don't look primitive as Big Bang theorists would expect. But arguments like that help confirm the truth of young Earth creation, which the Bible clearly teaches, flat earthers, because of their denial of space, they can't use those kinds of arguments, can they, Dr. Heinz?
Yeah, that's true. But that gets you into the whole, talking about the James Webb space station. That gets into origins, because as you say, the galaxies that they expected to find using that space station, they seem to be just as mature as all the other ones they've discovered. So it gets into the origin issue. It really has nothing to do with flat Earth or not, because that space station is far removed from the Earth. But the International Space Station, for example, there are scientists who have been on that International Space Station, who I have talked to actually at some meetings, and they have spent months up in that space station. When the astronauts go up to that International Space Station, they're there for months at a time. And and of course they've taken pictures from there, of the Earth from there, and that's certainly measurable. But even it takes time for light to travel from the Earth to the International Space Station, and also, like we saw with the GPS satellites, it takes time to go there and back again, and you have to take that into consideration. That means you know exactly how far those satellites are away, and those satellites obviously can take pictures of the Earth, and it clearly is curved from those satellites.
So on the James Webb Space Telescope, for example, it's my understanding from your presentation that it's orbiting in space at the sun at a special location, so many, many, many miles away from the Earth, and therefore flat earthers would have to deny that that's actually up there? Or I'm curious, how do they interact with that?
Yeah, they make the assumption that there are no space stations out there at all. That they don't even think the James Webb Space Station exists. They just said it's a NASA has come up with this idea of a space station like that. And obviously they could Photoshop something like that. And so they don't believe it's real. But we know astronauts who have been up to the International Space Station, and those that space station is real, and it's way above the the assumption that the flat earthers make, because from there you can see the curvature of the Earth, and that's only 250 miles up.
Right, and that goes back to the summary that I made at the beginning of the Q&A, that they have to invoke a large amount of conspiratorial thinking to address a lot of these points, that everybody's kind of in on it. And on the curvature issue, and I know this is kind of a basic point, but doesn't it do the job to show curvature? Because when we see a ship sailing away, we know the bottom disappears first, and then the top disappears last. So if the Earth was flat, and I'm sure they got a response to this, but it's a basic point that kind of answers the curvature issue. But if the Earth were flat, wouldn't the entire ship just simply get smaller and smaller and smaller rather than kind of dip away?
Right, and you wouldn't see the hull would not be going down. Everything would be going down, and it just looks smaller. And obviously the ancients, came up with the idea that the Earth is a sphere because they could see ships disappearing over the horizon.
Right.
That was one of their pieces of evidence. And the example of eclipses, with the shadow of the Earth is a curve on the moon. You can see it on the moon, right? How did that appear on the moon? If the Earth was flat, it wouldn't appear that way.
Good point. That's a good point. And so if the Earth were flat as well, I've hosted a couple of major flat Earth debates. One that I hosted a couple of years ago, the pro-glober side, Dr. Robertson Jennis, he was pointing out the fact that you can't see, for example, New York from Chicago, or Europe from America, or Africa from South America, and that curvature, not distance, basically blocks that view. And I just remember the flat earther not really having a good response to that. So in your opinion, Dr. Heinz, is that another good point to suggest curvature rather than a flat earth?
Well, if you talk about seeing Europe from North America, I would be surprised if you'd be able to see that on any time, even if it was flat. I mean, that's way too far away. So, but you have to get above the Earth to see that curvature. And but it gets back to the reason that they cannot answer my 12 challenges is because their assumptions are wrong. Their basic assumptions are wrong, and if the assumptions are wrong, and we can show that the assumptions are wrong, then their conclusions are necessarily wrong too.
That's a good point. So ignoring Europe and America, what about just seeing New York from Chicago? Let's say within America, if the Earth is flat, shouldn't they be able to see some of these cities? I mean, on a flat Earth, you would. I don't think they would be hidden in the same way that.
There are all kinds of issues, of course. I mean, is the weather totally clear? Is the sun as bright as it can be? And I don't know when that would, when you can't see anything anymore, what that distance would be. I mean, we're talking about 3,000 miles. And obviously with a curvature, you would not be able to see that at all.
Right.
But a flat Earth would be depending on a very clear, mist-free path between those two places.
Yeah, that's a good point. Well, I guess you could run an experiment or a testable prediction that on a globe you would never see these cities, even within the states,
right?
Because of the curvature. But on a flat Earth model, maybe they could look every single day and account for all the different factors. And if they get one shot of a city from a far distance, then they could use that against us. But I'm assuming they've never gotten that, which is why they can't use that against us.
Right. There's too many things standing in the way. I mean, it's not, there's dust in space, right? And that's why the James Webb space station is 1 million miles away from the Earth. So it's out of all the atmosphere distortions that could possibly, you have to deal with when you try to look a long distance away.
Right, that's good points. Well, we got one here trying to address the satellite issue, I think. Adam Thero, appreciate the question. He's asking, why do underwater sea cables make up 95 to 99% of internet traffic? I'm just assuming that this is an argument in favor of the flat Earth in response to satellites. Do you have any thoughts on that, Dr. Heinz?
Well, the cables on they depend on fiber and light, the certain frequencies traveling over that. Whether it goes through the cable, it doesn't go outside the cable, it goes through the cable. So whether the cable is flat or whether it curves, it doesn't matter. I can run a cable from my computer to a TV in a different room, and the signal is still going to get there because it's going over the cable. So that has nothing to do with flat versus curved, because signals can travel along a flat cable or a curved cable.
Can't fiber optic cables move thousands of times more data faster and cheaper than satellites anyways? So it seems more of an economical issue than evidence against satellites or a globe.
Yeah. That is the most dense communication link.
Right. So here from Ford Hughes, he says this, but I'll kind of set it up because as we've discussed already, Dr. Heinz, these images from the James Webb Space Telescope or the space shuttle or space station, or pictures we get from space from astronauts showing the Earth and showing that it's clearly not flat, it's all fake, it's all CGI. And they'll point out legit pictures that have been promoted of the Earth that are CGI, right? Because there are some that aren't real. And so this comment, and then they'll extrapolate that to argue that all the pictures are fake. And so they remain skeptical. And this commenter, Ford Hughes, says, all of the photos of satellites Dr. Heinz has shown have been CGI. He says, that is odd, just like every picture of the alleged globe Earth. And then he argues that every single picture that we could use to argue against the flat Earth is fake. What's a good rebuttal to that?
Well, in the days of the Apollo landing, of course, I would argue that there were Photoshop was not done. I mean, Photoshop was it's a technology that's used to make pictures, but it wasn't available back then. So that's one thing. But if you talk to there's an astronaut, Jeff Williams. Some people may have heard of him. He's actually the man that he had 4 trips on the International Space Station, and he spent the longest amount of time in space of any astronaut. And I spoke to him at a conference, and he's a very strong Christian. He's a believer. He's got a book out which shows pictures from space, and to tell me that he's lying about that is not credible. I mean, he's a real person. He's a very frequent speaker. He's on the board of a church. He's an elder at a church. He preaches, and to say something like that is lying is beyond belief, really.
Well, they've even invoked that for the final experiment. We had some people invoking that in the live chat tonight, where I'm challenging them to engage the final experiment. We did for over 3 hours when we had Will Duffy here on,
right,
and taking live chat questions for a few hours. And many were accusing him of lying and it's all a fraud and they didn't really go to Antarctica.
But the flat earth people that went with him admitted, yes, the sun did shine for 24 hours on those days.
But I guess they were in on it too.
Oh.
and that's the point. To me, that's a hard pill to swallow.
Well, one flat earther came out and said, yes, you're right. I changed my view. But the other one decided, well, yes, you're right. It did shine, but there must be an explanation from a flat earth perspective.
Right.
And see, that gets into perspective, the Zetetic astronomy philosophy. And that's not real measurement. I mean, it's not reality. It's just a perspective. I mean, it's like on a flat earth, how does the sun set and how does it rise? That's perspective. Mm-hmm. There isn't an explanation, but they haven't come up with a credible explanation that they could measure and show to be true.
I'd like to see an actual model presented. Obviously, as globe earthers, we have a model, we have maps. I'm not sure if they've put together or presented any kind of sophisticated mapping of the flat earth.
No, there's no credible map of the flat earth model. Not all flat earthers even agree, I mean, on the distance of the dome above the earth, or the size of the sun and the moon. And we have technology today that could test some of their beliefs, but they give this measurement of 32 miles diameter, but we should be able to measure that. Is that real? But they don't give us a way to do that.
Which makes it difficult to work towards falsifying. And I mean, in science, we're supposed to come up with a hypothesis and do experiments and try and disprove the model. But I guess one could say the 24-hour experiment did that.
Yeah, that's a pretty concrete test.
Mm-hmm. Well, here's a good question. Harden and MTP3, appreciate it. Why doesn't sunlight appear evenly across the horizon at sunrise or disappear evenly across the horizon at sunset?
I mean, in the flat earth model?
Yes, he'd be a pro flat earther.
Yeah, but it's clearly it's not, right? When the sun is shining in North America, it's not shining in China. And but their answer to that is the spotlight sun. But the spotlight sun can't explain it either, because we know when the sun rises at every place in the earth, and you cannot fit the spotlight into that model, because that spotlight nobody has told us exactly the dimensions of that, right? And they must have dimensions. They must have a real model, a measurable model. But
Right.
I've never seen anybody present that.
Is the major reason they would deny things like real world GPS, satellite communication, global flight paths, which we know assume a spherical Earth, and because because the flat earther struggles to account for those on a flat Earth, they deny it altogether, basically.
Well, there's no way. I've never seen an explanation from a flat Earth person why it takes longer to go from Boston to Los Angeles than from Los Angeles to Boston.
Hmm.
I mean, that's clearly a known fact. I mean, it's you can look at your flight schedules. You can measure it on your clock if you fly. I mean, it's 5.5 hours to go from Los Angeles to Boston, but it's 6 hours and 20 minutes to go from Boston to Los Angeles. I mean, that's measurable. So what makes that happen on a flat Earth model?
Right. That's a great point. These are challenges that your prominent flat earthers need to address.
That's
Here's
right.
one that comes in the form of a super chat. So I appreciate the support from A Pilkey, $14 super chat. And looks like he has a flat earth argument. So he's wondering this, Dr. Heinz. Why do you say there's no observations when what we actually observe by default, stepping outside, is a flat, stationary Earth with stars rotating around us?
The well, their model is that the stars are in the dome, right, and they're
Right.
fixed. And so I don't know. See, we talked about the Polaris star, which is observable from the northern hemisphere, from most of the northern hemisphere, but it's not observable from Australia. Why is that?
Right.
I mean, there's no explanation from flat Earth that is satisfactory to that.
And I guess his argument, and I've seen this, is an appeal to our senses or that which is logical. You know, he's basically saying, well, we just step outside and look around you. Everything looks flat. Look at the sky, look at the stars. But isn't this kind of a one-dimensional way of determining the shape of the Earth? Like, we're going to need a little more than just going outside and looking around. If the Earth is as big as it really is, I mean, is it enough to just look around us as we step outside in the morning to determine the shape of the Earth?
Yeah, well, it obviously it does look flat as far as you can see, but that's not very far. You know,
Wouldn't
because
an ant, if I were to put an ant on a giant basketball, the ant's so small compared to the basketball, I mean, what they see is probably flat too, I'd imagine.
oh yeah, 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 because that distance is the size of a basketball is not very large.
And so we're on a giant globe. And then they'll use rhetorical arguments. They'll say, oh, well, if we're spinning through space at this massive amount of speed, then how are we not flying off? And do you really believe that, Dr. Heinz? What's the best way to respond to that kind of rhetoric that I see so frequently from flat earthers?
Yeah, well, see, you are moving with the Earth, right? But there are circuits, air circuits in the atmosphere above you, but you don't feel them because the atmosphere moves with you, or you move with the atmosphere, right? So, but there are experiments you can do, um, shooting a bullet, a great distance, and if it's a long distance, like I showed you with the Navy warships, they have to make adjustments for distance and for the rotation of the Earth, for the curvature of the Earth. Why do they have to make those adjustments?
Right.
If the Earth was stationary and flat, they would not have to make those adjustments.
What about when they argue? From my understanding, I mean, I spend a lot of time debating evolutionists, but very little time debating flat earthers. So I might get some of their points wrong. But from my understanding, they deny gravity. They'll say it's not necessary, and basically all you need is density and buoyancy. That can explain everything. Is that true, Dr. Heinz?
That's their assumption, but that assumption doesn't hold, obviously, because then why does they have the sun, under the dome, a few thousand miles up, less than 3,000 supposedly. Why doesn't the sun fall down then? Because it's heavier than the density of the air. What's holding that up?
Right, that's a good point. And can density and buoyancy hold the oceans to the Earth, like we know gravity can?
Yeah, well, gravity works because with a spherical Earth, we are moving, and there's an attraction of gravity between the sun and the Earth, and the moon and the Earth. So it's the gravity that keeps the moon and the sun, or the moon in the orbit of the Earth. So why is the moon in the flat Earth model? Why doesn't it fall down under the buoyancy laws?
Right. And to them, they look at the moon because, unless I'm just deceived, or maybe it's my preconceived thinking from school, but when I look up at the moon, I mean, it does look like a rocky ball, but they would say, no, that's false. Those are lies from Satan, and it's basically a light. Is that how they would argue, that the sun and moon are just lights, and the moon itself is not made of rock?
Well, yeah, I've seen some flat Earth say, well, the moon is a source of light, but it's according to the Bible, it's not. It itself is not a source of light. It reflects light, but it's not a source in itself.
Right. Which kind of makes sense, that as the Bible, it's the lesser light because it's reflecting the light from the sun.
Right.
In the same way as believers, we're reflecting the light that's in us. The light is Jesus Christ.
Yeah.
Okay, those are some really good answers. Clearly, you've studied this issue, Dr. Heinz, and I'm learning a lot from you as well, just kind of reiterating what I've heard. So here's one that comes in from Luke. It's a few in one, so this is helpful. So we can take it one point at a time. Luke says, the Bible teaches that the earth is fixed, stationary, and has a firmament. You address the firmament in good detail in your presentation, with waters above, which means there is no outer space and it's not a spinning ball in space. Okay, so perhaps, Dr. Heinz, just to make this comprehensive, and for people that are out in the world and having a discussion, maybe a flat earther comes into their church and they start promoting or pushing this idea, they're going to hear all of this. So the first point, the Bible just teaches that it's fixed, stationary, so it doesn't move or revolve around the sun. Well, let's start with that point. What would be the best way to engage that?
Well, I'm not sure which verses he's referring to specifically, but yes, there are statements that I think I showed you on one of my slides. It says the earth does not move, but that's you have to look at the context around that.
Right.
Is it dealing with the shape of the earth? There are many verses that, out of those 200 verses that some people claim support a flat earth, you have to look at the context. And that's what, Dr. Carter and Dr. Sarfatti have done, and also Dr. Jason Churchill. Those 6 long articles where he takes all these issues into consideration. They're on my web page. The flat-earth. So you can read all of his articles on that too. So they explain those issues like that, because it's very dependent on the context of those words and which translation are you using. Like I said, the words firmament, what is used for that in the English Standard Version is the expanse.
Right.
I mean, it's what's above the earth, the atmosphere and the sky. That's what is meant by that.
I've heard, and I'm curious as to your thoughts, I've heard several different interpretations from creation scientists and theologians on the expanse or the firmament, I guess the rakia in Hebrew. And Dr. Russell Humphreys, I've heard him explain it. He's also a physicist. He says, well, the firmament is the expanse of space. And basically it's that stretched out space where in the Old Testament talks about God stretching out the heavens.
Right.
And so in that expanse is where God placed the sun, moon, stars, galaxies, and heavenly bodies. Is that a good way to view it, you think, Dr. Heinz?
Yes, it is. I think that's what all these scientists would explain it that way. And the theologian, Dr. Jason Churchill, he does a very good job of that as well.
So it doesn't have to be a hard dome, because I hear prominent flat earthers all the time, including one of the more popular ones we had debating, Will Duffy. He really pressed that issue of the rakia, that it's a hard dome, has to be something hard, and that we're basically denying what the scriptures say. But no, the scriptures and the Hebrew language doesn't demand it being a hard dome.
Right. Yeah. And that's, I think all of these scientists that I list on this slide here, and also Sarfatti, they look at it that way.
Oh, that's good. Yeah, Dr. Rob Carter, Dr. Faulkner, Dr. Lyle. And then contextually fixed in scripture, depending on the context in the verse, could it also just mean something that's established by God, rather than it's not referring to unmoving physics, but basically God's stability in his sovereignty.
Right. Yeah. Like I said, it all depends on the context and how those words are used. And
well, that addresses that. Luke, I appreciate it. He says the Bible teaches, so it's kind of an assertion, fixed, stationary, and has a firmament with waters above. Well, we address that. So I appreciate how knowledgeable you are on this topic, Dr. Heinz. I feel like could act as one of those go-to videos addressing the flat earth and all of their arguments and rescue devices. Doki Doki has a question here. This one I've seen too, so I appreciate this one coming in. He says, common objection verse he's seen, Matthew 4:8. Again, the devil taketh him up into, and I see atheists use this as well, where I engaged in a formal debate maybe a couple of weeks ago, and one of the atheists, there was a 2 versus 2, he was attacking the Bible by saying, oh, it definitely teaches it's flat. And one of the verses he used was this one. So again, the devil taketh him up into an exceeding high mountain and sheweth him all the kingdoms of the world and the glory of them. So in order to see all the kingdoms of the world, obviously the earth has to be flat, Dr. Heinz.
Yeah, that's in fact in my slide number 3, I use that verse too,
Yes.
Matthew 4:8.
Yeah, I've got it up on the screen.
Yeah, and so that see, it is a I think that's Satan is challenging Jesus to show him all the kingdoms of the earth, and so he has to be high enough. I mean that you have to look at the context of that, right? I mean, it's not that there's no mountain high enough to see all the earth, whether it's flat or spherical. I mean, you just can't see that far.
Right. So is this a supernatural experience?
Yes, I would
Right.
see that. Yeah.
Well, that's how I've always read it. I never actually pictured in my mind that all of the kingdoms, literally physically as they are being shown, but that this is a supernatural experience in the temptation.
Right.
So here's one that comes in. I appreciate you reiterating some of these points, Dr. Hunt. As we do this live, people kind of make their way into the program at different portions of it at different time marks. So this one comes in from Frontier Disciple. Let's see what he has and see if there's anything we haven't addressed. He says, best arguments for flat Earth. Law of perspective, explaining the horizon. Horizon rises to eye level. His next argument is flight pattern. So why don't we start with that one, Dr. Heinz? Law of perspective, explaining the horizon. Horizon rises to eye level. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, see that there comes that word perspective,
Mm,
right? It's the same argument that they use for, the sun rises and the sun sets. It's perspective. So that's a word that they use. It's not real. It doesn't match reality.
right. And
So it's perspective. And see, I always use the when I teach apologetics, I challenge people to by the statement is, does what you believe to be true match reality?
right.
And that's the same thing with flat Earth, because perspective is not, that's not reality.
Good point. His next one is flight patterns make more sense. And we addressed this one, but maybe we can reiterate the more important aspects of it. So he says flight patterns make more sense on the flat Earth model.
Well, then it should be very easy to explain. My example of flying from Los Angeles to Boston and then Boston to Los Angeles, if it's all flat, it doesn't matter where you fly from A to B or from B to A, it should always be the same distance, right? Because
Right.
it's if it's all flat beneath you, then it's the distance is exactly the same. So if you're flying your airplane at the same speed, it's going to go take the same time, but it doesn't. See that, and that's reality. It doesn't.
I've heard that Southern Hemisphere flights are difficult, if not impossible, for flat earthers to explain. Why would that be, Dr. Heinz, do you think?
Well, it's all from perspective, because if you look at their map, in the northern hemisphere with the North Pole at the top down to the equator, you'll notice on their map, it almost looks the right sizes. But then when you get down to Australia, in the southern hemisphere, it is I forget, 2 or 3 times larger than it really is. So that's all perspective, right? It's not reality, because that's not really how large Australia is compared to, America. It's perspective.
Right. And so in light of that, him saying flight patterns make more sense on a flat Earth model, it seems like it's quite the opposite. They make sense on a globe Earth.
Yeah. Take my example. I mean, this is all in the northern hemisphere. It's simpler, and so the measured distance, if you travel by car from Los Angeles to Boston, and then travel by car back, it's the same distance. Now, of course, you can take different times because you take different stops and all that. But on an airplane, it's one nonstop flight.
Right.
So on a flat Earth, if it doesn't move, it doesn't rotate, then there's no reason why it should take a different amount of time. I don't know how they explain that. I don't think there is a flat Earth explanation for that.
How do they explain? I'm curious, and I know Dr. Danny Faulkner, I think, wrote an article, an extensive article on the time zone issue, where, for example, if it's noon in New York, it's midnight in Beijing, and that would only be possible on a rotating sphere. But on a flat disk, the sun would be visible to everyone at once, or they must invent the local spotlight sun that you're talking about, which contradicts basic physics and geometry. So are they kind of stuck between a rock and a hard place on that?
Yeah. First of all, it's hard to, what are the dimensions of that spotlight? And nobody tells us what that spotlight size is, and how much area it covers. On a flat Earth, it would always cover. I mean, if the spotlight doesn't change in different places on the Earth, it would always cover the same amount of area. No matter where it was. Mm. And of course, it's going to cover New York at different times in Beijing.
Right. Then it's interesting with the final experiment. How's that spotlight shining for 4 days straight in one spot? And then wouldn't that mean everything else is night?
Yeah. You cannot explain that in a flat Earth model. And the flat earthers know that. But
which is why many are converting, right? That's enough to do it.
Yeah, I'm not sure how many, but there are some. But there was, and I forget his name, but he's a very prolific writer and debater. He agreed that the sun did shine for 24 hours, but he doesn't know how to explain it from a flat Earth perspective yet. But
there's a couple that come to mind. Jeranism, I think he's a YouTuber. That's his YouTube handle name. There's another one, Witsit Gets It, I think. He didn't convert, but I think he recognized it's an issue at least.
Yeah, he's the one that recognized there's an issue, and I have not seen him come up with a solution yet.
Right. That's very interesting. Okay, and then the last one, which we already addressed, but to leave no stone unturned, he says, frontier disciple. So we addressed the flight patterns, the perspective with the horizon. And then he says, but again, we addressed this, so maybe we can just reiterate the point. Gravity isn't necessary because of, and there we go. So they do say it, density and buoyancy.
Right. So, well, again, take the moon, it's rotating. What keeps it up then? Well, why doesn't it fall down?
Right.
Like everything else would, because the air is much thinner and lighter than the moon, supposedly. What keeps it up there?
Yeah, that's an answer. That's a question the flat earthers need to ask themselves and provide us skeptics, us globers. So,
and just to reiterate, that's why I put out there the 12 challenges to the flat earthers. How do you explain this with your model, right? And then your model is based on these 12 assumptions. And if you cannot show me that your assumptions are true, then your conclusions are also false. And you cannot, that's why you can't explain those 12 challenges.
Those are 12 challenges that even if I pretended to be a flat earther, I have no idea how I would address those. So those are really good. And as this video goes out onto social media and gets passed around, perhaps we can see if any of the prominent flat earthers can address them.
Yeah. I look forward to seeing their response.
Me too. And I'm kind of curious from a scriptural standpoint. Maybe this is a good argument. Maybe it's not. But I'm thinking about the flood. We talk a lot about the global Genesis flood here on Standing for Truth. And Genesis 6-8, we understand, doesn't describe a local flood, right? It says that the waters covered all the high mountains under the whole heaven. So we have this language that emphasizes the universal or global nature of the flood. But on a flat earth, wouldn't that water then just flow off the sides unless God is basically miraculously holding it into place?
Well, I would guess that the flat earthers would say the ice walls are high enough to contain the water.
Okay.
I would guess, but I'm not sure if they've answered that satisfactorily.
And then beyond that ice wall is the elites kind of orchestrating everything, or I've seen some interesting conspiracies on.
Yeah,
if
we
you were
don't.
to,
Yeah, I don't see any credible explanation for what's beyond the ice wall.
right. Well, this was great. This was really helpful and edifying to me as well. I feel like I learned a lot here tonight from you, Dr. Heinz, especially you allowing me to ask these questions and kind of reiterate points that I've seen over the years. Because, like you said, this is important because perhaps there are flat earthers coming into churches, and perhaps they're challenging those in the congregation with some of these points and arguments. And so it's good to have a video like this that is comprehensive and thorough, in order that we in the body of Christ can be equipped to address these challenges. And so, Dr. Heinz, I want to hand it to you again. I want to thank you so much. I want to hand it to you in case there's any final thoughts, final words, final arguments or points that you wanted to make as we wrap things up.
Yeah, well, like I said, and I presented those 12 challenges to flat earthers, and they need to come up with an explanation for each one of those. How do you explain it? And then and then if these, the next slide I have is on the 12 assumptions that I think they make, and show me that those assumptions are true, because if your assumptions are false, then obviously your conclusions are false. And then on this last slide, the 119 that I used, so these are my major conclusions. And I highlight number 10 because I believe that flat earthers have been deceived by Robotham just by the experiment that he did on 1838 was drew the false conclusion because he cheated. He held the telescope close to the water so that the path of sight could look over the that curvature, and so and then he's the one that came up with these three things: that the Antarctic is an ice wall, and also that the sun is really a spotlight sun, and and then things like gravity is not a real force that works, that explains anything. So those are things that he basically came up with, and so if the things he came up with are false, then he is deceived, but he's also deceiving others that follow his thinking. And zetetic astronomy philosophy is his invention, his idea. I know of no other one that it's not a general philosophy that people follow these days. So I just frankly say that flat earthers have been deceived by Samuel Robotham.
Well, that's a very interesting point, because Samuel Robotham, a lot of his points that he was either deceived by or willingly open to deceiving others with these points, it's been a ripple effect of a lot of flat earthers over the years using those arguments that simply don't work. Obviously, the spotlight model of the sun doesn't work, as you've shown. And an important point there on your slide, which I have screen shared, is all of them are important. 6, the flat earth model fails to explain observations, as you've demonstrated. But number 9, spherical earth, is supported by the Bible and by science. So for all those in the comment section that continue to, in my opinion, ignore the scientific challenges, and they continue to repeat the claim that, well, the Bible teaches a flat earth and a globe that is stationary and fixed, and so we're just denying the scriptures. No, I think you did an excellent job tonight here, Dr. Heinz, showing that that's not the case, and that a globe Earth is both consistent with science, but also what the scripture has to say.
Correct. Yes, I do believe that. And yeah, I look forward to seeing challenges for, or answers to my 12 challenges. Tell me I'm wrong on those challenges.
You know, what would be fun is we can see if there's going to be any responses or any interaction with those challenges. And then on a future date, when we have answers to those challenges, we can reconvene here and do a program addressing or engaging them.
Yeah.
Just to see if they work or don't. Maybe we can get the flat earthers to convince us and convert us to their side, Dr. Heinz.
Right.
Okay. Well,
Thank you for the time you've given me to expound on this topic.
Well, it's my pleasure. I appreciate how comprehensive you are. The last talk was excellent. We spent a lot of time in discussion and Q&A there as well, which I enjoy because it helps us to reiterate important points, but it also allows us to expand on the topic and interact with the audience as we get endless questions. We got a ton of questions, but luckily a lot of people were asking the same question in different ways. And so we were able to tackle a few in one. And so I'm just double checking that we got through super chats and questions. Looks like we did. And so Dr. Heinz, excellent work. A lot of people giving you positive feedback, saying thank you, Dr. Heinz. They enjoyed this. Okay, I look forward to the next time we can get together again. And to those in the audience, thank you so much for the energy. I appreciate the fact that we had both critics and non-critics on this issue in the chat. Hopefully we got you to think. I know this program definitely got me to think. And over the course of the last few hours, I've learned a great deal about this topic. And so very helpful and very edifying. Dr. Heinz, please, to the live chat, check the description box of this video for a link to where you can watch more of Dr. Heinz talks on all things origins. Okay, God bless everybody. Thank you so much for tuning in, and Standing for Truth is signing off.